Good evening, everyone, especially to Ma'am Kathleen Seppi. Good evening, Ma'am. So I am Charis Miasco, and I'm going to explain or provide detailed explanation about the five taxonomies, which is the first one is Bloom's taxonomy, the second one is revised Bloom's taxonomy, the third one is affective domain, psychomotor domain, and the last one is Kendall and Marzano's new taxonomy of educational objectives. Now, I'm going to explain or provide an explanation about Bloom's taxonomies 1956, or which is the original, and the author of this is Benjamin Bloom. So, here's the Bloom's taxonomy. It consists six, which is the bottom knowledge, comprehension, application, to be followed by the analysis, the synthesis, and also the last one is the higher one is the evaluation. So first, what is knowledge? So knowledge is recalling facts, like for example, memorizing terms. That is knowledge. And the second one is comprehension. When we say comprehension, it is an understanding meaning. So it explaining ideas. And the third one is application. It is using knowledge in real situation. So when we say application, the the students or the learning of the students should be applied in the real life situations. And the next one is analysis, breaking information into parts. So as a teacher, you need to help your students. You need to explain information from general to specific, like chaponym. So in order for them to understand better. And the next one is synthesis. So what is synthesis? Synthesis is the combining ideas to form something new. So um, it means creating or combining ideas para makabuo ka og bago. And then the last one or the higher one is evaluation, which is judging or making decision. And then you as a teacher, you're going to evaluate your students' learning. If they really learn from your lessons, that is why you're conducting a quiz or exams or even through performance like group activity, role playing to to judge them if they really learned your topic. So that is original Bloom's taxonomy. And the second taxonomy is which is revised Bloom's taxonomy in 2001, updated by Anderson and Krathwohl. This version uses verbs, and it is more action-based. So here's the pyramid. So the bottom is remembering, which means recalling information. That is remembering. Like for example, a teacher asks his or her students to enumerate what are the capital cities or countries in Southeast Asia. That is remembering. Understanding it is, which means explaining ideas. Applying, like for example, you as a teacher, let your students to summarize the moral lesson of the story Little Red Riding Hood in their own words. Or you let your student to summarize the moral or the lesson of the story about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or about Cinderella. So that is understanding, which means to explain ideas. And then applying. So applying, which means using knowledge. Like for example, use 5 new vocabulary in original sentences. Analyzing, which means examining parts and relationships. Like for example, Compare and contrast the protagonist in No Limitang Hiri and El Filibusterismo. So that is analyzing. You let them compare and contrast, and evaluating, which means making judgments. Like for example, you assess or you group your students into two and made them an experiment, fairly test and hypothesis and suggest improvements of what they done. And the next one, as the highest one, is creating, which means producing new work. So like for example, create a model volcano that shows how real eruptions happen. In a science and subject science, you let your students to create a volcano or a model of the volcano that shows how real eruptions happen. Or in a short story, you let them create new or write an alternate ending to a short story about Cinderella. So you let your students to create new ending. So that is the revised Bloom's taxonomy. So the third taxonomy is affective domain that consists emotions and values. So this taxonomy focuses on feelings, attitudes, and values. So here's the pyramid. The first or the bottom one is receiving, which means being aware or willing to listen. The second, responding actively, which means actively participating. To be followed, following, which means showing importance of something. Then organizing, which means arranging values into priorities. Characterization, which means consistently acting based on values. Like for example, a student not only lessons about respect, but actually practices it daily. So that is affective domain. The example of affective domain is a student not only lessons about respect, but actually practices it daily. Not just word or not just hearing what the student heard, but use it into action to respect and what we call that, to exercise it daily, to respect regardless of the background of the people, regardless of the background of their classmates, teachers, and everything. So the fourth taxonomy is psychomotor domain, which is skills, about skills and movements. So this deals with physical skills and actions. So here's the pyramid. The bottom one is perception, using senses to guide actions. That is perception. Set, which means readiness to act, which means being ready to do something. Guided response, which means imitation or practice. What the students see or hear, most of the iyang i-imitate based on the teacher's teaching. No? Kung unsa isulti sa teacher, mo po i-imitate. Despite nakadepende siya kung unsay environment o society sa usa ka bata, kung kitahay na siya sa environment nga full with respect, so ang bata kamausad siya mo respeto. Then mechanism, which means performing skills with confidence. Complex overt response, which means skilled performance. Adaptation, which means modifying skills. The highest form is origination, which means creating new movement patterns, which means In psychomotor domain, origination is the students will create their own or their original movement or movement patterns. Like for example, learning how to dance, type, or perform experiments. That is psychomotor domain, more on movement, more on skills, or like in sports, that is psychomotor domain. One of the example, sports. Last taxonomy is about Kendall and Marzano's new taxonomy of educational objectives. So this is a modern and more detailed model focusing on how thinking systems work. So the first one is retrieval, which means recalling knowledge. Two, comprehension rather, which means understanding information. Knowledge utilization, which means applying knowledge in tasks. Cognitive system, which means analyzing and reasoning. Metacognitive system, which means thinking about thinking. Focuses on planning, monitoring learning. That is metacognitive system, thinking beyond thinking. And the last one is self-system thinking, which is motivation, beliefs, and importance. So the learning of this taxonomy is influenced not just by thinking but also by motivation and self-awareness. Here's the simple comparison of the five taxonomies. So the old or the original Bloom's taxonomy in 1956 focuses on thinking skills from basic to complex. The revised Bloom's taxonomy focuses on action-based thinking, which is verbs. The original one is noun and the revised one is verbs. And the third is affective domain, focuses on emotions and values. The fourth one is psychomotor domain, focuses on physical skills. From the word psychomotor, it talks about movement, physical skills. That is psychomotor domain. And the last one, which on Marzano's new taxonomy of educational objectives, which means focuses on thinking plus motivation plus self-awareness. So that's all for my detailed explanation about the five taxonomies, and that's all. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.